Men truly just need to extend their emotional vocabulary so they can flourish and have meaningful, healthy relationships. But instead, y'all listening to these Kevin Samuel ass and it's leaving you 50 and alone.
Part 3 of this deep dive into the therapy problem is where the series shifts from the demographics and the academic pipeline of training clinical mental health providers to the intersection between therapy and ideology. Part 1 established who sits in the therapist chair, and Part 2 explained how they got there. Now in Part 3, I'm going to follow by answering what happens once those therapists bring their beliefs to the public and into the room with their clients. And here, at least for me, the issue is not that therapists have personal views or opinions, because everyone does, but that in a profession built on what should be neutrality and trust, the appearance of activism or bias undermines the very foundation of therapeutic professionalism. Surveys and essays, including those many published by Psychology Today, reveal that many therapists openly struggle with the idea of treating clients who hold opposing political views, especially Trump supporters in the United States. Some therapists even openly admit that they hesitate to take on such clients or that they fear that they cannot provide unbiased care. I'll put a couple of overlays here as well. Now, I do not think that this is a marginal concern. If therapy is supposed to be a space where clients can express themselves without judgment, what happens when political litmus tests creep in? It transforms therapy from a refuge to a battleground. And beyond politics, there are even more extreme cases that illustrate these risks. A recent example is the Long Island, New York therapist who posted an anti-Semitic rant on social media, including comments like, "Germans should have ended your kind." The post went viral as professional directories, including that of Psychology Today, removed this woman's profile, and calls for her license to be revoked followed. Ultimately, the story spread quickly because it exposed what many people already suspected, that clinical therapists' activism, anger, and ideology can and is often expressed very publicly with apparently no regret. Once that trust in therapists, in that neutrality, is broken, the entire system, the entire profession starts to look suspect to many people. Clients begin to wonder whether they're there to be helped or to be converted. The problem is compounded by how therapy is presented in training. As I discussed in Part 2, students are socialized and self-selected into academic cultures in which certain ideological frameworks are often taken as certainty. Terms like social justice, cultural competence, anti-racism, they become not just professional tools of help, but dogma. Now listen, I understand. While these frameworks can be valuable when applied thoughtfully, in practice they often tilt therapy toward political or personal monolith rather than open-mindedness. A therapist trained to see every client through a political lens is less likely to treat that client as an individual and more likely to see them as a category, whether it's privileged, oppressed, conservative, or progressive. Let's be clear that this is not theoretical. Research shows that the therapeutic alliance, that is the trust and bond between therapist and client, is one of the single biggest predictors of outcome across all therapeutic modalities. If that alliance is infected by distrust, either because the therapist feels that they can't work with a certain type of client or because a client suspects that they're being judged, then therapy fails before it even begins. For male clients in particular, many of whom are already hesitant to trust therapy, ideological bias becomes yet another reason to drop out or to avoid starting at all. Here's how Part 3 and the ideological drift connect back to the full arc of this deep dive. The therapist gender imbalance in part 1 and the institutional shaping, that pipeline of that imbalance discussed in part 2, leads to a profession dominated not only by women, but by certain cultural and political frameworks. Once that funnel spills into the therapy room, then the risks are clear for guys. And at that point, therapy is no longer a neutral space for healing and for learning or growing, but rather becomes another stage for activism and personal ideology in professional practice. And clients, especially men, are left wondering if their therapist is listening to them or filtering them through ideology to brainwash them. That question of outcomes sets up part 4 coming up in just a moment, in which I will dig into the research on whether therapy actually improves quality of life equally for men and women, and whether the therapist-client gender matching makes a measurable difference.